The Tetons stood sentinel, just as they always had, indifferent to the small dramas of human hearts played out beneath their immutable stone faces. For 45 years, these mountains were my home, my classroom, my sanctuary. I was Garrett Stone, a wilderness guide, known in Jackson Hole for my steady hand, my encyclopedic knowledge of the range, and my unyielding respect for the raw power of nature. People came to me seeking the summit, yes, but often they found something more profound, a quiet truth about themselves, or about the simple, brutal honesty of the wilderness. My life was ordered, grounded, as solid as granite. I trusted the mountains, and in turn, people trusted me. It was a good life, a true life. Then Cassandra arrived. She came to me through a mutual acquaintance, another high-net-worth client who raved about my expeditions. Cassandra was an enigma from the first email, concise, demanding, yet with an undercurrent of something almost playful. She wanted to climb the Grand Teton, a challenging route, a true test. When I met her in person, she was everything the rumors suggested. Striking, probably in her late 30s, with eyes that held a peculiar glint, like a predator assessing its prey. She had a way of looking at you, not quite meeting your gaze but sweeping over your entire being, taking inventory. She spoke with a polished cadence, every word chosen, every compliment a feather-light touch. She said she admired my reputation, my quiet strength, my bond with the mountains. I remember feeling a faint, almost imperceptible tremor of unease, like a rock shift deep in a glacial crevice. But I dismissed it. My world was solid. Finn was my proc, my climbing partner for a decade, practically family. He was 25, full of fire, fearless, and sharp, with a laugh that could echo through the canyons. I'd taught him everything, from reading the snowpack to tying the most intricate knots. But more importantly, I'd taught him respect. Respect for the mountain, for the client, for himself. He saw me as a mentor, a big brother, sometimes even a father figure. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I saw a younger version of myself in him, eager to conquer, but still learning the patience of the peaks. Cassandra, however, seemed to see something else entirely. She quickly developed a fascination with Finn. It wasn't overt at first, just a lingering glance, a question directed to him when I'd just answered it, a soft smile reserved only for his jokes. I noticed her subtly encouraging his more audacious ideas, the ones born of youthful exuberance rather than seasoned judgment. She'd say things, seemingly innocently, like, "Finn, you have such a bold spirit, it's almost palpable." Or, "Garrett, you're so wonderfully cautious, it's a fascinating contrast." At first, I chuckled, thinking she was just trying to build rapport with the whole team. But that faint unease began to solidify, a small, persistent pebble in my boot. I told myself I was being oversensitive, that she was just charismatic. But my gut, the one that had kept me alive in blizzards and rockfalls, felt a dull throb. The training days progressed, and Cassandra's influence began to subtly warp the dynamic between Finn and me. We'd be discussing a route, and I'd lay out the safest, most efficient approach, factoring in weather and group fitness. Cassandra would interject, not directly contradicting me, but posing rhetorical questions that amplified Finn's more aggressive suggestions. "Garrett," she'd murmur, "don't you think a little more? Adventure is what we're really after here?" Finn seems to have a real instinct for it. She would praise Finn's physical prowess in front of me, making comments like, "Finn, you move like a gazelle on these slopes, so effortless." I found myself feeling oddly diminished, my decades of hard-won experience seemingly less impressive than Finn's raw youth. It was a subtle, insidious erosion of my authority, like water slowly wearing away stone. Finn, bless his eager heart, soaked it up. He started walking a little taller, laughing a little louder when Cassandra was around. His suggestions became less suggestions and more pronouncements, delivered with an almost competitive edge. I saw him looking at me differently too, a flicker of impatience in his eyes when I insisted on a safety check or a slower pace. "The mountains demand patience," I'd tell him, but he'd just nod distractedly, his gaze already drifting towards Cassandra. She had a way of making him feel like he was the center of attention, the true leader, the one who truly understood the wild heart of the peaks. And the wild heart of her. The psychological pressure built slowly, insidiously. I'd lie awake at night, the crisp mountain air doing nothing to clear the fog in my mind. Was I too old? Too cautious? Had I lost my edge? The questions gnawed at me, attacking the very foundation of my identity. My hands, calloused from years of gripping ice axes and ropes, felt suddenly inadequate. My usually clear decision-making became clouded with self-doubt. I'd catch myself replaying conversations, dissecting Cassandra's every word, trying to find the real meaning behind her veiled compliments and questions. It was exhausting. The joy I usually found in the preparation, the crisp morning air, the silent camaraderie of the mountains, was slowly being replaced by a gnawing anxiety. The comfortable rhythm of my life was out of sync. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day where Finn openly questioned my judgment on a rope placement, Cassandra found me by the campfire. Finn had already retreated to his tent, probably at her subtle suggestion. She sat beside me, her presence radiating a warmth that felt both inviting and utterly artificial. She placed a hand lightly on my arm, her touch sending a shiver down my spine that was not entirely pleasant. "Garrett," she began, her voice soft, almost a purr, "you're a legend in these parts. But sometimes, legends can get a little set in their ways." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, then leaned closer. "Finn," she continued, "he has a fire in him. A passion. He's what this industry needs, you know? New blood, new ideas." She smiled, a knowing, almost predatory glint in her eyes. I could smell the faint scent of jasmine and something else, something sharp and metallic, like ambition. My stomach clenched. It felt like a knife twisting into my gut, yet she was saying it with such a gentle, sympathetic tone, as if she were confiding a shared truth. I mumbled something about experience having its place, about wisdom. She just patted my arm again. "Of course, Garrett. Of course. But the mountains don't wait for wisdom, do they? They belong to the bold." She then stood up, her gaze fixed on Finn's tent, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something truly chilling in her eyes. A hunger, a calculated desire. Later that night, I overheard hushed whispers from Finn's tent, followed by a soft, almost imperceptible giggle that I knew was Cassandra's. A cold dread settled in my chest, a physical ache that tightened with every passing minute. It wasn't just about my leadership anymore. It was about something far more personal, a betrayal that cut deeper than any criticism of my skills. Finn, my Finn, was being pulled away, seduced, not just by her charm, but by her poisonous words against me. She was isolating me, making me feel obsolete, even in my own domain, with my own proc. It was a calculated, cruel game. My world, once so clear and defined by the stark truths of the wilderness, was becoming a landscape of shadows and shifting sands. The expedition itself was a slow-motion unraveling. Every decision I made was subtly questioned, every command met with an undercurrent of skepticism, mostly from Finn, subtly prompted by Cassandra. She'd lean into Finn, whispering something, and then he'd turn to me with a suggestion that was clearly hers, cloaked in his voice. "We should push harder today, Garrett. The weather looks stable." Or, "That crevice isn't so wide. We can probably jump it." I'd argue for caution, for the safety protocols I'd honed over decades, and Finn would sigh, rolling his eyes almost imperceptibly, mirroring Cassandra's subtle expressions of impatience. It wasn't just my authority that was being chipped away, it was my belief in myself. I started second-guessing every instinct, every decision, convinced that maybe, just maybe, I was becoming a dinosaur, too cautious, too slow. Then came the day of the summit push, the final, exposed ridge of the Grand Teton. The air was thin, the wind biting, and the rock faced a daunting, sheer ascent. This was where experience truly mattered, where one wrong move meant disaster. As we approached a particularly challenging section, a traverse across an exposed ledge with a sheer drop on both sides, Finn spoke up, his voice tinged with the bravado Cassandra had so assiduously cultivated. "I think we can cut across that snowfield, Garrett. It'll shave off an hour." It looked tempting, a pristine white expanse, but my gut screamed danger. I'd seen snowfields like that before, hiding crevasses and unstable ice. "It's too risky, Finn," I stated, my voice firm despite the tremor in my chest. "We stick to the rock." Cassandra, who had been listening intently, stepped forward. "Finn," she said, her voice dripping with admiration, You really do have an eye for these things. It looks exhilarating. She turned to me, her smile tight. Garrett, sometimes the faster route is simply the more elegant one, don't you think? Finn puffed out his chest, emboldened. I think she's right, Garrett. We can do it. A cold sweat pricked my skin. The pressure to prove myself, to not appear old or hesitant, clashed violently with every ounce of my ingrained caution. I looked at Finn, the younger brother I'd raised in these mountains, now looking at me with a mixture of defiance and expectation, his gaze fixed not on me, but on Cassandra. Her eyes dared me to resist. In a moment of weakness, a moment I'll forever regret, I conceded. All right, Finn. But we stay roped, and we test every step. We moved onto the snowfield. The silence was broken only by the crunch of our crampons and the whistling wind. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread. With every step, I felt the unsettling hollowness beneath the surface. It was more unstable than I'd anticipated. Then, without warning, the snow beneath Finn's feet gave way. A sickening crack echoed, and he plunged downwards, screaming. The rope snapped taut, tearing into my harness, slamming me against the hard ice. I dug my ice axe in with every fiber of my being, my muscles screaming in protest, the biting cold barely registering against the surge of adrenaline. I felt the familiar weight of a life hanging on my strength, but this time, it was different. This time, it was a result of my own capitulation, a betrayal of my own judgment. Cassandra screamed too, a high, piercing sound of fear, but her scream quickly changed to a frantic call, Finn. Finn. It took every ounce of strength I possessed, every technique I'd mastered over decades, to haul Finn back up from the gaping maw of the crevasse. He was shaken, bruised, and weeping, clinging to me as if I were his only anchor in a storm. My arms trembled, my lungs burned, but I had saved him. We were safe, for now. As I helped him steady himself, my own breath coming in ragged gasps, my radio crackled to life. It was Cassandra. She was further back, having refused to follow us into the snowfield, claiming she'd stay put for safety. Her voice, clear and chilling, cut through the thin mountain air, not intended for me, but for Finn, who still wore his earpiece. Garrett's a dinosaur, Finn, her voice purred, laced with a triumphant venom that turned my blood to ice. The mountains belong to the bold, and so will everything else. The words hit me like a physical blow, stripping away every last illusion. The chill wasn't just from the mountain air anymore. It was an internal frost. Her true face, utterly devoid of any warmth or care, was suddenly starkly visible. She hadn't just used Finn to undermine me. She had actively endangered his life, egging him on, all for a twisted game of power and control. And the final sentence, and so will everything else. It wasn't just about the expedition. It was about Finn's inheritance, his future, everything she could possibly seize. My legs felt like jelly, my vision swam. The air grew impossibly thin. I stared at the vast, indifferent peaks, and for the first time in my life, I felt utterly lost, adrift in a sea of lies. The descent was a blur of strained silence and throbbing pain. My body ached from the physical exertion of saving Finn, but the deeper wound was in my soul. I couldn't look at Finn, whose face was still pale with shock and confusion, without seeing Cassandra's poison dripping from his every word. I couldn't look at Cassandra without feeling a profound nausea. She tried to approach me later that evening, feigning concern, her eyes still holding that unsettling glint of triumph hidden beneath a veneer of sympathy. Garrett, you were amazing, she said, placing her hand on my arm again. You saved him. My skin crawled. I pulled away as if burned, unable to tolerate her touch, her voice, her very presence. The truth, once a whispered suspicion, was now a roaring bonfire in my mind, consuming everything I thought I knew. Back in Jackson, the immediate aftermath was a blur of exhaustion, anger, and a grief so profound it felt physical. I saw the doctor, got checked out, but my injuries weren't physical. They were existential. The foundation of my life, my trust in my judgment, my bond with Finn, my love for guiding, it all felt shattered. I walked away from the expedition, from the rest of Cassandra's payment, from everything. I couldn't bear to be in the same room as her, or even Finn, who seemed to slink away, caught between shame and the lingering allure of her manipulation. I kept hearing her voice in my head, a constant loop. Garrett's a dinosaur. The mountains belong to the bold, and so will everything else. It was an assault on my integrity, on the very essence of who I was. I retreated to my cabin, a small, rustic place nestled deep in the pines, far from the bustling town. For days, I barely ate, barely slept, lost in a haze of betrayal and self-recrimination. The mountains, usually a source of comfort, now seemed to mock me with their impassive grandeur. How could I have been so blind? So foolish? My pride, my reputation, my sense of self, all lay in ruins. The man who had faced countless dangers with unwavering resolve was reduced to a trembling mess, consumed by bitterness. But amidst the emotional collapse, a different kind of clarity slowly began to emerge. The silence of the cabin, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the trees, forced me to confront the rot. It wasn't just Cassandra's cruelty. It was my own vulnerability, my own need to be seen, to be relevant, that she had exploited. I had let her words chip away at my core values, the very things that made me a good guide, a good man. I had betrayed myself when I compromised on that snowfield, when I doubted my own wisdom. The awakening was painful, like a deep tissue massage on a bruised muscle. I saw Cassandra for what she was, a void, a parasite that fed on the trust and ambition of others. And Finn, my earnest, impressionable Finn, was just another victim, albeit one who had unwittingly become her tool. I felt a surge of sorrow for him, but also a growing understanding. He was young, ambitious, and susceptible to flattery. I hadn't lost Finn. I had lost a version of him that was already being twisted by someone else. The first steps to leave the wreckage weren't about leaving the mountains, but about leaving the version of myself that had allowed this to happen. I knew I couldn't guide, not yet. Not with this poison in my veins. I needed to shed it, to reconnect with the pure, unadulterated truth of the wilderness, away from human complexities and deceptions. I packed a light bag, my old, trusted gear, and left my cabin with a destination in mind, the farthest, most untamed reaches of the Teton Wilderness. I needed to walk until I found my way back to Garrett. My journey into the wilderness was a pilgrimage of solitude. I walked for weeks, tracing forgotten trails, scaling remote peaks, camping under star-dusted skies that stretched endlessly overhead. The crisp, clean air filled my lungs, slowly pushing out the stale, poisoned atmosphere of betrayal. Each step was a meditation, each climb a cleansing. I remembered the simple wisdom of the mountains, the lessons I had always preached but had, in my arrogance or complacency, forgotten. Patience, humility, respect for forces greater than oneself. I carved out a new rhythm, stripped bare of human drama. The mountains demanded presence, not posturing. They cared nothing for wealth, or manipulation, or power games. They simply were. I cooked over open fires, drank glacial meltwater, and listened to the silence, punctuated only by the calls of ravens and the whisper of the wind. My hands, once trembling with self-doubt, found their rhythm again, confident and strong as I navigated treacherous terrain. My mind, once cluttered with Cassandra's insidious words, slowly cleared, becoming as sharp and focused as it once was. There was no sudden epiphany, no single moment of dramatic healing. It was a slow, arduous process, like the geological forces that sculpt the peaks themselves. I cried sometimes. I raged against the unfairness of it all, against the bitterness that still clung to me like ice on a north face. But each raw emotion was a step towards acceptance, towards letting go. I started journaling, pouring out my thoughts onto paper, dissecting the events, understanding my own part in the dynamic, not to blame myself entirely, but to learn. I recognized that my integrity was not dependent on external validation, but on internal truth. The mountains had shown me that you can only trust the ground you stand on if you've tested it yourself. When I finally emerged from the wilderness, weeks later, I was a different man. The lines on my face were etched deeper, but my eyes held a new light, a quiet strength. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. The bitterness had dissipated, leaving behind a bittersweet wisdom. I had lost Finn, perhaps forever, and the pain of that was a scar that would remain. But I had rediscovered myself. I returned to guiding, but with a renewed purpose and a clear discernment. My clientele shifted. I no longer sought the thrill seekers or the status climbers. I sought those who truly respected the mountains, who understood the inherent humility required to face their grandeur. I shared my lessons, not just about knots and routes, but about inner strength, about trust, and about the quiet power of integrity. Sometimes, I still saw Finn around Jackson. He looked different, harder, his youthful fire now tinged with a weariness I hadn't seen before. We never spoke. There was nothing to say. I knew he was still caught in Cassandra's orbit, or had been for a time, and the thought saddened me. But I knew his path was his own to navigate. Mine was clear. The Tetons still stand sentinel, and I still stand with them, a part of them. My life is rebuilt, stronger than before, anchored by an unshakable inner compass. I am Garrett Stone, wilderness guide, and I have found peace, not in escaping the past, but in understanding it, transforming it. The mountains teach us that even after the fiercest storms, the sun will rise again, illuminating the peaks, leaving the shadows to recede into the valleys. And sometimes, those shadows, once feared, reveal the truest contours of the land and of oneself. I learned that the most dangerous summits aren't always the highest ones, but the ones we carry within. And I had finally found my way down from the summit of lies.